Welcome, everyone. This is Erik Roth here, Shamanic astrologer and alchemical astrologer, coming to you with another video here. And this is in my planets, excuse me, my planets in astrology series. And this one deals with Mercury. So I call it the motions of Mercury. Plus, we'll also talk about Mercury retrograde, which, as of the day of this recording, Mercury is retrograding through the sign of Virgo here on August 12th, 2024. So I've done videos about other planets, and so looking forward to really utilizing the material that I connected to with shamanic astrology and experiencing and working with Mercury over the years, and through sessions and through observing it, and also in mundane astrology too. So this will be a fun little trip through Mercury and what it means to us and its importance in our own lives, in our charts, and for the collective as well. So we'll get right into that here. So let's see what we've got going on. So some of the major categories here, which we'll kind of go through: Mercury and astrology, the elements of Mercury, which are really important for Mercury as a planet, and then the cycles of Mercury. We'll talk about what is the Mercury cycle all about, and how do we work with it, or at least in a sense of, like, where's the start, where's the end, and what's going on in the middle of all that, with particularly the retrograde back and forth there. And of course, we'll put some time in at the end of this video to talk about Mercury retrograde. So this is kind of think of it as a kind of a rundown of, like, if we were to teach a class on Mercury. This is sort of a synopsis of Mercury and what we'll be getting into in the class. All right. So let's take a look at what Mercury is, the messenger planet. So Mercury has been known as messenger planet for thousands of years, and it was named after currently the Roman god Mercury, who was the messenger of the gods. Also, of course, the ancient Grecian component, Hermes. And that goes even farther to the Egyptian Thoth. And if you want to take it even farther back, ancient Sumer and the Mesopotamian region, there were different gods or deities that were associated with Mercury, like Nin-Shubar, who played a role as the sort of the messenger for the original goddess, one of the original goddesses, Inanna, from ancient Sumer. So in very ancient times, the Mercury Hermes as a god was that ruled the mind, communication, perception, and thinking processes. It was also connected to knowledge and sort of that education and the connection to that. There is a little bit of this as Hermes Mercury, mythologically and archetypally, that can show up also as a teacher. But it's also connected to writing and also being a trickster god. So the farther you go back, the different kinds of qualities start to show up with this particular planet and many other planets as well. Mercury Hermes was associated with the rise of magical and cosmic knowledge. This god was able to go to the underworld and celestial realm with ease. So this is reflected in the planet's frequent dives into the glare of the sun, hidden realm of the underworld, with the sun also a stand-in for cosmic creation. So Mercury is a planet, if we watch it, instead of just looking at it one day, per year, if we catch glimpses of it and we follow it in the sky, we can see that it is a planet that is harder to see than most other visible planets, and tends to move pretty quickly. And since it orbits as close to the sun as closer to the sun than any other planet here in the solar system, it tends to stick with the sun, because we are, as Earth being the third planet from the sun, we are looking inward toward the sun when we're looking toward Mercury. So it doesn't necessarily it doesn't go very far from the sun. In fact, it typically only goes about 27 to 28 degrees away from the sun. So not even a full sign of 30 degrees away from the sun, whereas other planets can move beyond that. And then the planets that orbit beyond Earth can travel throughout the sky not really tied to the sun. At least perceptibly, it doesn't look like it's needs to like retrograde back after it reaches a certain degree. So unlike Venus and Mercury. So that's part of the story. So when we think of as above, so below, we think of that Mercury diving in and out conveys the knowledge mythologically, archetypally, that we also connect into ourselves here as human beings on this planet. So what is some of the mythic identities associated with Mercury, at least archetypally, um, and in traditional astrology? Well, I'll have more here, but traditional astrology looks at it as a there's a greater connection with the signs of Virgo and Gemini. In the work that the system that I use, Mercury's primarily associated with the archetype or the sign of Gemini. And here's some names that we can look at in from various parts of the world that have seen Mercury in various forms, or even as the trickster gods, which is one of the names here. So the bright illumined teacher, the messenger, the contrarian, the thief, the trickster, the psychopomp, which is a guide for souls. That's mostly associated with the underworld. As Mercury tends to be a shapeshifter as well here, so it can actually go shift forms and play a wide variety of roles to accomplish whatever is needed in the moment. It's also a guardian of the threshold, so it's kind of that last planet before getting to the sun as we dive inward, whereas Mercury becomes that guardian there, the threshold in the threshold to creation. And then it's also been connected with the magician and the Native American Hyoka or Kokopelli. Animals like shamanic animals are associated with that coyote and like the mockingbird or like the blue jay. There's some birds in sort of that area that kind of connect into that sort of those trickster communicative qualities there. Of course, one could look at birds in general having certainly an element through the element of air, and Gemini belongs into the element of air, which naturally connects us to Mercury and Hermes. So one of the things about this is this mythology around Mercury and Hermes really goes back to especially ancient Egypt with Thoth and the ancient Sumeria. But the whole, for those that look at sort of the Hermetic, Hermes is built into that word Hermetic, the Hermetic teachings going back to the Emerald Tablet and any more ancient writings as well. That supposedly comes from the like authored by Hermes, perhaps written or through a human being at one time, or maybe multiple human beings that wrote under the guise of Hermes. There's a lot of arguments around what is what around that. So the more ancient teachings, the more susceptible it is to skepticism and or where the origins really come from. But there were a lot of magical teachings, and they connect you to writing and sort of the interplay of the mind with form and function. And that interplay, brings in the mind into the physical realm itself. So Mercury in astrology, in shamanic astrology as well, it symbolizes the mind and all that is. It connects us to how we perceive, think, and communicate with others and the world around us. In addition, it plays a powerful role in how we learn, so education, and work with knowledge. The sign, element, modality, and the astrological signs, elements, and modalities play important roles in how the mind emerges within us all. So because the fast-moving nature of Mercury, being the fastest planet in the sky, obviously the moon is the fastest moving natural object that we see in the sky on a regular basis here that orbits the Earth. But as far as the one that just strictly orbits the sun, Mercury is the fastest one there. So, but in personal transits, conjunctions tend to be the most important. But squares, oppositions, and trines can play a role too, depending on what is happening in the chart itself. And in mundane and world transits, Mercury is the mind that is shape-shifting the various forms, signs, and elements. And I'm going to be talking about the element part, particularly in this video here. Traditionally, Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo. And in shamanic astrology, Mercury has a resonance with the sign of Gemini. That's because in the work that in the astrology I work with, I associate the sign of Virgo mostly with the asteroid Vesta. And so it doesn't mean that Virgo doesn't have an association with Mercury, because I do feel like there is a natural fit there too as well, because of all the earth signs, Virgo has sort of the greatest connection to the mind, if you will. And you definitely experience it when you are meeting people or connected to others that have some strong Virgo energy, that you could definitely tell that there's a lot of sort of that mental energy like being processed through there too, really strongly with Virgo. So I understand why traditionally it was connected to Mercury. So in a year, Mercury goes through all 12 signs, like Sun and Venus, and conjuncts every planet, asteroid, and lunar node at least once, and sometimes multiple times. So Mercury also has 3 times where it goes retrograde. So it's the only planet or at least from observing from Earth, that will retrograde more than once per year. Every other one is either mostly once per year, or in the Venus's and Mars's case, it's more than, for Venus, it's about once every year and a half. For Mars, it's about once every 2 years. In astrology, Mercury is generally seen as masculine as a planet. There's this polarity in astrology that has to do with, planets and signs, they're either masculine or the feminine. But in my astrological experience, Mercury tends to be, and Gemini even more so, tends to be neither feminine or masculine. It tends to be more androgynous, kind of this greater connection to alchemy itself, which is fascinating to consider, because some of the origins of what we consider like psychological or metaphysical alchemy come from and relate to Hermes and the ancient writings of Hermes Trismegistus, Thoth Trismegistus, from thousands of years ago, particularly in ancient Egypt, where that word originally comes from. And then the Greeks, of course, like the Greeks and Romans, took different philosophies and different knowledge and customized it with their own knowledge and wisdom and systems, and brought their own version of that into the public eye. So the astrological element of this planet tends to be a bit more important than others, as expressed. It doesn't mean that the others aren't important, because they definitely are, particularly with regards to the inner planets. Those elements tend to be more highlighted here. So each of its synodic cycles, or we can just say cycles of Mercury, will have a theme of one of the 4 elements, which I'm going to get into here in a little bit. So I'm not going to read everything here, but I'll just go over the main parts of each of the elements. And you can, if you wanted to pause it and read some additional insights here on the screen. But of course, there's 4 classic elements. And for people that have Mercury in a fire sign, Sagittarius, Aries, and Leo, it's more intuitive, instinctual, actional, and visible. So there's a greater viability in being seen, if you will, being heard, with fire energy in the world, particularly in the communication, thinking processes. For water, it's more about the feeling and the heart and the passions. It's also those Mercury signs, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces, can be more adaptive and receptive in their connections with others, particularly in Pisces and Cancer energy. Air, this is more idealistic. It's intellectual, cerebral, curious, and observant. So this is a sign that's in the head a lot, if you will. Each one has their own strengths and blind spots as well. For Earth, it's much more practical, constructive, realistic. So it's really into the form and function and looking at things in the long term. That is those Earth Mercuries. Now, each year we're going to have one theme of Mercury in an element, whatever sign that might be. So in 2024, at the time of this recording, we're in the theme of fire. So the last time that happened was in 2017 and 2018. Sometimes you get 2 years in a row where it's in that same element. In the years after 2024, we have 2 years in a row of water, and then 2 more years of air, and then it goes into earth. So if you think back at the year 2017 to 2018, here, particularly here in the US, we had for example, the rise of the Me Too movement. In 2018, we had the midterm elections, which, the Me Too movement really fueled a lot of that. And we're really much more like strong feelings, energy coming through, this intuitive, like fiery type of passion, not the watery type of passion, but the fiery type of passion that's really on the surface a lot and going for it. Really strong energy coming forth, and that fire energy really supported that. That's just one example of how the thinking process and the ideas can come through in that fire. There's a sort of a power there that wasn't so much involved with the thinking process as far as the mind goes, but much more intuitive and instinctual. So as we go through this year, maybe we can correlate, not just in the United States, but in other places you live, you may be able to correlate that. And for the people that are born here, this is looking at those during these years where there's more chances than not they're going to have one of these elements as far as their Mercury position, and that's because this has a lot to do with Mercury's transit in the station retrograde and station direct points, where it can spend a lot of time in that one element or that one particular sign for a couple of months. So it tends to dominate a lot of the different parts of the year in any given year. So these themes are generated by the point that when Mercury stations direct, which is the point where it starts its cycle, the synodic cycle itself. And I know that some others may use the Mercury conjunction with the sun, although there tends to be about 6 or 7 of those conjunctions per year. So, because Mercury's going back and forth, that's the one point in the sky where it always has multiple conjunctions. With Venus, it can vary anywhere from 1 to 5 conjunctions, depending on the year, usually around 3 or 2. And then with the other planets, it's typically just 1. So let's take a look at the Mercury cycle. Mercury cycles or synodic cycles, they last on average about 4 months or 120 days, and always begins with Mercury stationing direct. Again, this is just from the perspective that was brought forth from more of the sort of the ancient teachings and looking at, sort of what Mercury was and weaving the mythology into that picture. So the point of direct motion for Mercury shows the sign or the archetype of the overtone. So it kind of sends out for the 120-day period where that sign becomes the sort of the main feature of that Mercury cycle. And Mercury can go up to about 6 signs during its 120 days. And you can see here, I've got this graphic where it breaks down the different sort of periods of time where Mercury is, after Mercury station is direct, where it's seen in the AM, the morning sky. That's about a third of the cycle. Then it goes into what we call the exterior underworld, where it's moving through and behind the sun, between Earth and sun. And then it comes back around in the evening as an evening star and moves through about 2 to 3 signs. And this is part of that, which kind of edges into sort of the retrograde period as well. And then it has the interior underworld, which is when it comes between Earth and the sun, and that's primarily the retrograde period there. So if a person was born when Mercury was an evening star or was in the evening sky, Mercury will have traveled through in the cycle about 4 to 6 signs prior to the birth. And then if a person was born when Mercury was a morning star, morning star, Mercury will have traveled about 1 to 2 signs prior to the person's birth. All right, so let's take a look at Mercury retrograde. So all planets, of course, can go retrograde with varying frequencies and duration. For Mercury, this can average about 3 weeks, but can at times be as long as 24 to 25 days of retrograde period. Like this current retrograde period we're in now in August of 2024, it's 24 days. So those are what's one of the longer retrograde periods. And Mercury retrogrades can average across the sky about 13.5 degrees. It could be as short as 9 degrees and as long as about 16 degrees. So each one is going to vary a little bit. Mercury has a very elliptical orbit. So it's like as it does its rounds around the sun, it's things can manifest in different ways. So it's retrograde period and how much it moves across the sky. So it could be a little farther from the sun or a little closer to the sun where it's moving a lot faster. A little farther from the sun is not moving quite as fast. Mercury does have a follows pattern about 6 to 7 years where it retrogrades in the same sign. And if you're looking at like when does Mercury return back to the same position it was in when you were born, at your solar return, well, that's every 6 to 7 years. So that's something that you can count on like as a Mercury return. Mercury retrograde can be often experienced as a linear time disconnection in communication and any tech associated with it. It's an opening to a creative, magical process. So there's a lot that can be shared. I've done other videos about Mercury retrograde, and I do posts on my social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. So you can look at that as well with each incoming Mercury retrograde period. So, when we have a lot of experiences where there is, plays havoc with certain technologies that we have. But it's mostly focused in on sort of in part, the educational process and the communicative process. And since we have such a heavy reliance on electronic communications here in the modern world in the 21st century, it's, Mercury retrograde can be more acutely felt. But there are ways to work with it more strongly. If we have a greater awareness, with what's happening with Mercury retrograde, we can really work with it more consciously. So I see a lot of people like Mercury retrograde is one of those things in astrology that, after our sun sign that most people know in astrology, oh, Mercury retrograde this or Mercury retrograde that. And it tends to have more negative connotations, but it's not inherently negative. Kayla Castell, colleague of mine and mentor as well over the years, she talks about Mercury retrograde and some helpful insights. So I've written articles about this too, but I wanted to share this as part of the energy around Mercury and Mercury retrograde. So part of the time we can look at Mercury retrograde is we can surrender our limited perspectives and awareness and support rapid transformation into an overall new identity or archetypal expression. So we are going through a transition and sort of a creative process. It's an opportunity to experience the fluidity of time, creating new possibilities and experiencing freedom from the constraints of linear time in that 3D reality. So there's that kind of that metaphysical energy here, expanding into a multiverse where all possibilities and probabilities already exist. So it's not just like one thing. It can be a multitude of things. So it also creates sort of this magical field that uplifts and expands our awareness when embracing and surrendering to the evolutionary prerogative. So we are moving beyond where we are into something new. So one way to look at this too is when things are going backwards, like Mercury, it's a time of reflection and contemplation, time of like withdrawal, and we're kind of looking at things, and that can open up more creative space for ourselves. So we can open up and go deeper into who we are when Mercury's going retrograde. And when you are having to, because we live a regular life, we're having to rely on technology and communicate with people, family, friends, work, coworkers, and so forth. it's important to really be conscious of what we're talking about or communicating with, to be extra diligent, extra careful in how we do that. So if we're sending out an email or a text or some other message, we want to be clear what we're saying and just take some extra time to look at that, because that's where we can have hiccups in that. Or if we're communicating with others, verbally, on the phone or in person, we may want to take some time to, connect in and with our thoughts and what we're experiencing. Now, it could be for others, like if we have more of that fire sign energy, it may be a good time to, like, do more reflection and more into our mind a little bit before speaking, before we think, kind of a thing. And then with the air signs, definitely connecting into the thinking process more strongly, but not in a rapid fire Gemini type of way, or even Virgo type of way, but more thought to be put into that, more reflective. So it's more kind of, to some degree, is a little more earth energy into that. It's going backwards. It's kind of going deep, back into the earth, back into creation. And so you're really connecting into that wavelength there. So this is, Mercury retrograde, and as of this writing, Mercury's got 16 or so days left in it. So, no one's exempt from this, and it's important that we connect into that energy more strongly for ourselves. We can be active and co-participants in our lives with the planets and the signs themselves. So that was a synopsis of Mercury and Mercury retrograde. So thank you all for being here. I'm excited to do more of these videos. And you can always, this is a video you can play at any time, because it's really all just about kind of Mercury retrograde, for any of them, general information there. So I'm a astrologer, and I do personal readings. I teach classes. I'm on social media, of course. I also do mentoring, one-on-one mentoring and teaching that way. And you can contact me at inspiralnexus@gmail.com, or reach out my website, inspiralnexus.com. And please like or subscribe if you really like this content and want to see more of that. Please sign up for that. And at mystaralchemy.com is also a place where I've done some work with Kane Castell, particularly about the stars and what their influence is in our own lives, beyond just say the planets or the signs themselves. So there's a lot there to open up to, and keep learning, keep being open, have your heart and mind open, and the knowledge won't stop coming in, right? So I look forward to seeing you at the next video, and take care.